Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Football Law Digital Conference. We're back for another session, but this time on women's football. Now, a lot of the issues that we've heard about already overlap between men's football and women's football. Not surprisingly, because it's the game of football. However, we felt that given the rise in women's football and let's say the rebalancing, or listening and starting to see a direction with the rebalancing, with the attention and money and focus that women's football was getting and the increasing rise in popularity, it was necessary to have and important to have a women's football panel to hear what's going on, particularly as we've heard in some parts of the world where women's football is being kind of neglected, let's say, ahead of the men's game for whatever reasons, specific to particular jurisdictions. For those of you that aren't familiar with me, my name is Sean Cottrell. I'm the CEO and founder of LawInSport. I'm literally just going to introduce the panels and then and the moderator, and then I shall be gone and I shall hand it over to our capable moderator for today. We're just waiting for everyone to log in, and hopefully everyone's now logged in, and then I shall introduce the speakers and moderator for today. So first up, our moderator is Reyes Bellver of Bellver Sports, a legal boutique, but she's also the co-founder and CEO of Leadership Woman Football Platform, which those of you who don't know, she's done a whole bunch of different things, including webinars, but also events primarily out of Spain, but bringing together and giving a platform to various women in leadership positions and inspiring women leaders. It's been a fantastic project. If you haven't checked it out, you thoroughly should, and perhaps I'll stick a link in the chat once we get underway. Reyes is heavily involved in sport and particularly football, but she's also very fluent in Spanish, English, and German. She's been identified as a leader in sports law by Who's Who Legal, amongst others. She's president of the Sports Law Association of Madrid, a founding member of the Spanish Association of Ethical Quality in Sport, and a coordinator of Spain of the WISLAW, Women in Sports Law International Association, which many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with, and an organization we support. Next up, we have Izzy Ray. She's a consultant at Deloitte Sports Business Group, where she moved after working for Sport England for a number of years in their talent development team. Many of you will have heard her participate in the Women in Football events, or seen her contributions to the fantastic work that the Deloitte Sports Business Group do. So we're delighted to have her here with us. Next up, we have Nan Sato. Many of you will know her. She's on the LawInSport editorial board, and she's spoken at many of our events, providing a fascinating insight into the developments, particularly around the player association movement and player union movement worldwide. Nan is a Japanese and American sports lawyer who advises internationally player associations, Japanese player associations. She deals with commercial sponsors, clubs, athletes in a number of sports, including football, baseball, rugby, ice hockey, and climbing. Her practice primarily focuses on labour and employment aspects of sports law. She works in Japanese women's football with women's footballers and is a member of FIFPro Police Women's Football Workforce, very relevant for today. Finally, we have Daniele Muscarà, who is a legal consultant at Juventus Football Club, where he's worked for a number of years, advising on a whole bunch of areas, including the women's football team and its development, as well as commercial, regulatory and intellectual property issues. He's also on the board of the Italian Sports Law Association. Thank you very much for joining us. Other than that, Reyes, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm very much looking forward to this panel. So thank you for doing this, all of you. Oh, sorry. The one thing I'm doing so many of these, I'll just totally take it by that everyone knows what the sort of format is. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A part, and Reyes will come to you at an appropriate moment in time. If you obviously feel to introduce yourself in the chat feature, we'd love to hear where you've come from, what your backgrounds are, etc. But if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A, as we'd love to hear from you, but make sure you just identify it there. Reyes, over to you.
Thank you, Son. Thank you for the presentation. I hope my connection is good. Sorry for that. I would like to say first, thank you, Son and LawInSport, for the opportunity to moderate this great panel and topic. And also, I want to say my support to all the people who are suffering the consequences of this virus, and especially the women's football players around the world. who are dealing with this crisis and some problems, especially related to contracts and a lot of things. So that's my first message. And also I invite to the attendees to send questions and try to moderate everything. And I have some questions to every panelist. And then we have time also to answer your question. And I think some will help me with that. I would like to start with one question to each of our panelists, very briefly, around 2 minutes each, more or less, about the impact of COVID-19 in every country regarding women's football. As Spanish, I would like to tell a little bit the situation that we have now. The women's first and second division, Primera Iberdrola and Red Iberdrola, has been cancelled due to the coronavirus because the Spanish Football Federation took the decision to end all non-professional competitions, something that directly affects the women's league. Football Club Barcelona, a women's team, declared champions of Liga Iberdrola this season, and there's no relegation. In relation to contracts and salaries, we have in Spain a labor flexible mechanism called ERTE. Maybe you read in the news. This is Expediente de Regulación Temporal de Empleo. It's like a temporary suspension of employment contracts, not only focused on sports, it's for employment contracts in general. And most of the teams, and also women's teams, submitted the application to this proceeding to continue receive the salary and with a reduction and this kind of negotiations that we have also in men's football, and maintain also the stability of the club, which I think is the most important topic. So this a little bit briefly in Spain. I would like to listen to you. Maybe we can start with Izzy, if you want, if you are ready. I give you some minutes to talk about the situation. Thank you.
Sure, that's fine. So I'll give a small overview in terms of the situation in England. So essentially the top two tiers, so the FA Women's Super League and the Championship have both ended for the season, so there'll be no more play for the 2019-20 season. So the key driving factor behind that decision was financial reasons, and in particular the fact that there's sort of no lucrative TV rights deal behind the game, which is sort of one of the biggest drivers of return to play in men's football. In terms of the sporting outcome, so will anyone win the league or will the season be cancelled? That's not yet to be decided. I think the reason for that sort of potentially might be that if you look at the current league table, Manchester City are currently leading Chelsea by 1 point. But Chelsea have a game in hand, so in fact they've actually got a higher points per game, which sort of maybe creating a little bit of difficulty in sort of determining what's the final sporting outcome going to be, given that the season has ended. In terms of entries to the Champions League, this is also still yet to be decided, although the FA has said that those places will be decided on sporting merit. But as I said, we're sort of unclear exactly how those will be decided.
That's perfect. Thank you, Izzy. So Nan, please, your turn, please.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So I think I'm going to cover Japan quickly and then just give a quick overview of the situation in the US as well, where I'm based. So in Japan, the season started in late March. And as you know, that was in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. So the season was suspended soon after that. But Japan has managed to control the situation pretty well. And since then until until now. So the activities towards reopening are already happening. For example, a top league women's football team, INEC Kobe, announced that it was starting training again, group training today on June 1st. Of course, it's going to be following very strict protocols, including, for example, the players and staff members have to use masks in their clubhouses, and there's going to be no access to the shower room and the training room, and only a maximum of 7 players are allowed into the locker room at any certain time, and each player can only stay up until 15 minutes in the locker room. And before they enter the ground for training, they have to be tested whether they have a raised temperature or not, and handshakes and high fives are prohibited. So that's the situation in Japan. Seems like things are slowly moving back to normal. Training is reopening slowly. And on the US side, the National Women's Soccer League actually announced that they will return in late June. The first game will be played on June 27th. The 9 teams will gather in Utah and compete their entire season as a 25-game tournament in 30 days. So it's a very, very compact schedule. It's going to be an Olympic-style tournament with group stage and then an 8-team knockout stage. So each team will play 4 games to determine the seedings for a knockout round. And the tournament will be called the NWSL Challenge Cup. Of course, no fans will be allowed in the stadiums, and they're aiming to create this thing called the NWSL Village, where all the players and staff members will stay in only 2 hotels, so to keep them away from other people. And the players' opinions about this are split. Some are very eager to go back to play, whereas others are more concerned about the health of themselves and their teammates. With respect to sponsors, there are 3 main sponsors. P&G and Secret will sponsor the cup, whereas Verizon has a multi-year long-term agreement with the league itself.
Thank you, Nan. Very good. And thank you for know both situations, both countries, Japan and US. And Daniele, Italy, please tell us the situation in your country. The micro, okay?
Okay.
Now,
So,
thank you.
Thank you. The COVID-19 pandemic, as in other countries, has led to the suspension of football championship in Italy, including women's football championships. To this date, the Italian Football Association has officially proclaimed the final interruption of all women's football championships, except for the first and second league, on which the latter will be definitively decided on the next days. Probably we will meet a meeting on 4th of June in order to decide the probably restart on the 1st of July. The Football Association, along with the clubs and sport doctors, is studying an ad hoc protocol for women's football, because the one used and applied for men's football is too complex and difficult to implement in this sector, even at the economic level. Say that, the position of the club, especially for the smaller clubs, is to not want to start playing because they are at great economic difficulty due to the lack of income of sponsor, and will be difficult to fulfill the provision of the protocol. And above all, there are many foreign players who have to return in Italy from their countries, and this is very difficult because of the closed borders still now and the little flight available to coming back in Italy. From an economic point of view, in the event of restart of championship, the Football Association will make funds available to each club to help them to pay the salaries for the months from March to June. This amount will need also to permit the club to fulfill all provision in matter of safe and healthy provided by the protocol for the restart of the championship. Against this aid, the companies will have to demonstrate to this association the correct payment of players and staff salary before the enrollment for the 2020-2020 seasons. So we have to wait the imminent decision about the restart of the championships.
Thank you, Daniel. And I have a question now that is inside the topic of the impact, inside this first question from Mark O'Neill. So I would like to throw to the panelists. He said that the women's game has seen fantastic growth over the past decade, and the current pandemic may do great damage to all the needed gains of the past 10, 20 years, particularly in providing opportunities for female players to play at a higher level. Does the panel think that the game needs financial support from governments, for example, to support it through these difficult times to help maintain that growth? We were talking about the situation in every country, but what do you think about this financial support? Maybe Daniele, we were talking about Italy. Do you have something to add about in your country? Sorry, the micro. Thanks.
Yes, it's in Italy. It's, we are studying by the government and by the federation support to the football system, all men and women sector, with the reference to the women's sector. We are studying a regulation for the professionalization of the player, because at this date all women players in Italy are amateur players. So I agree with this question. Sure, it's necessary have the support of our state, our government, and our federation in terms of economic and financial helps.
Thank you. What do you think, Nan, about the financial support from governments on this public help?
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. I think definitely there needs to be government support for women's football for mainly two reasons. One is most female players are amateur players, so they are not protected by the employment laws in these countries. So as I understand, a lot of countries in Europe and Asia, the government actually gives subsidies to the companies to make sure that they keep their employees during the crisis. But if you're not treated as an employee, then you can't even benefit from the normal employment scheme in these countries. So they are put at a disadvantage. And another reason is a lot of women players are, they don't even have written contracts. So it's very hard for them to be able to make a claim against the clubs during this difficult time. A lot of them are underpaid even before the crisis. They have to juggle several part-time jobs in order to be able to afford to play football. So the pandemic definitely didn't help, and without the governmental assistance, I think it's very hard for a lot of women to continue to play football.
Yeah, totally agree, Nan. Thank you. And Izzy, what is your opinion about this financial support, please?
So the situation in England, I guess, might be a little bit different, as sort of our top tier, the WSL is professional. So all of those players sort of will have employment contracts as part of that. In terms of financial support, so the majority of clubs in the WSL are sort of financially supported by their parent club, so by the men's club. So really sort of that financial support is going to be needed to continue, sort of in particular during this time, to ensure that those clubs can sort of survive this period. But in terms of the impact of COVID-19, I think as long as sort of some financial support is there sort of in the interim period, I think sort of the impact will more sort of be a pause on the growth for the short term. With sort of the medium to long term, it's probably more likely that women's football will continue on its growth trajectory.
Well, thank you. In connection with your answer, Izzy, I would like to talk now about the professionalization of women's game, because I think is the key, of most of the problems. We need to professionalize women's football competition, leagues, clubs. How is the situation in every country? So you can start, Izzy, because you were talking a bit about this is professional there in UK, but also how is working inside in every competition between league, federation, because this is different in every country. The league more powerful than in other countries. So explain a bit the situation, please, Izzy. Thank you.
Sure. So in England, the federation, so the Football Association, owns and operates the top tiers of English women's football. So that's a little bit different to how it works on the men's side of the game, with sort of the Premier League and the English Football League being separate to the association, so to the Football Association. And I guess also, so as I touched on before, the WSL being a fully professional league, and the tier below the Championship sort of being semi-professional. This might be a little bit different to some of the other countries which may not necessarily have a women's professional league. In terms of what the impact is of it being professional, so I think for the clubs to participate in the WSL, the Football Association ensures that they meet a specific licensing criteria. And essentially what that means is they have to sort of meet a number of guidelines to ensure that they're operating as a professional club. So that includes things such as a minimum salary for the players, which ensures that they can be full-time professionals and then not having to gain employment elsewhere. And one of the pieces of investment that has enabled that to happen has been the sort of recent sponsorship from Barclays Bank. So that started this season, and when that was announced, it's sort of reported to have been in excess of sort of £10 million over a 3-year period. So the impact of that is sort of I think when it was announced that it's the biggest sports sponsorship contract in the UK for women's sport. So that's been a real aid to the FA Women's Super League and the Championship as well. But I think one of the things to also put in there is that Barclays is also sort of committed to growing the grassroots as well. So part of that deal, which I've just said, includes their support for the FA Girls Football Schools Partnership, which aims to increase the participation of girls in football across the country.
Thank you. Perfect time. Thanks for every panelist. Nan, please, could you tell me something about the situation if you can, in Japan and US, or only in Japan? So please.
Yeah, sure. Because football is professional. Women's football is professional already in the US. So I'm going to focus on Japan in response to this question. So most players in Japan are amateurs. Like I said earlier, they have to juggle part-time jobs and playing football, and some have to be employed in a company in some back office role while being sponsored by the company to play. But despite this challenge, the Japanese women's national team is actually doing very well. As many of you might know, they have won many tournaments on the world stage, including the World Cup in 2011 and several Olympic and Asian Cup titles. So they definitely have a lot of support support, although not as much as we would like to see. And professionalization of Japanese women's football is actually on the schedule to take place in 2021, next year, with initially a 6 to 10 team in the top division. The current league, which is called Nadeshiko League, is going to continue on as an amateur league, but they're going to create a new professional league on the top of that. The new professional league will follow the European football calendar, which is very significant because currently both the Japanese men's league and the Nadeshiko League, they're on a different schedule than European football, which they start in spring, in March, as I mentioned, and this poses a lot of challenges to the players. So that's good news. And also each team must have a maximum of 5 players on what they call an A contract with no salary cap, and at least 10 players on B type and C type contracts with certain salary restraints. And also they are trying to use this new women's professional league to promote women's advancement in workplace. So each team will be required to have at least 1 female executive. I mean, it's not as many as it should have, but I think it's a good start to advance some social agenda through the professional league as well.
Thank you, Nan. Daniele, in Italy, it's also amateur, no? Amateur.
Yes.
How is the situation, please?
Yes. In Italy, all women football players are amateurs. As a consequence of that, abiding by the national and sport regulation in this matter, so in sport law, the women players are subject to the annual salary cap as maximum of 30,600 euros gross of tax. This limit is only overcoming in the event of pluriannual agreement, so biennial or triennial agreement. As amateur, and this is very problem of our players, they haven't right to insurance and social security safeguards because they have not an employment agreement. From a normative point of view, the state is studying a new law on the sporting employment relationship that should be ready by the end of August. And we hope this can foresee a new form of contract for the athletes. At the same time, it will be necessary to be very careful to not to change companies to financial economic burden, because the system having a little bit of commercial revenues in this moment may not support professionalism. With reference instead to the organization of the women football in my country, in Italy, does not exist a league that manages the competition of first and second championship, but the latter are directly managed by the federation. This is due to the fact, for example, within the women's Serie A championship, today there are both professional teams and amateur teams. This inevitably brings difference of talks in the management of the activities that probably still prevents sorry.
Yes. You okay?
Do you hear me?
Hear me? Yes, I hear you.
Okay, so
Thank you.
I was saying in the Serie A championship, we are both amateur and professional clubs, and this is inevitably prevent the commercial ideas and the commercial decision that we can take together. Despite the excellent work done by the federation, which undoubtedly helped to grow women's football in Italy in the last 2 years, I think the creation of the league can bring good benefits to the system, especially from a commercial point of view and for the increasing of commercial revenues.
Thank you, Daniel. In Spain, for example, is not professional in terms of Spanish sports regulation, Spanish Sport Act, and other regulation that we have. Only is professional the first and the second division of men's football, and also the first division of basketball. But it's something really old from the 90s, and now it's changing. There are a lot of proposals about that. And however, the players are professional, the women's football players, because they have contracts and also with salaries. And we have, as you are aware, we signed this year the first collective bargaining agreement. So in terms of activity, it's professional, but we need to update our regulation in Spain. No? We have some questions related to investment. That is very important issue inside women's football. I would like to ask Izzy first, as a consultant, how do you see the current situation in women's football in terms of investment, and if it's going to change because of this crisis, because of COVID-19, and also we can answer some questions about how do we make the case for the continued investment in the women's game, for example, Jane Pardon, and one or two questions more, but later if you want to tell us something about investment. Izzy, please.
I think so with the situation with investment, it's important to first note that so the majority of WSL clubs are currently supported by their men's team. So given the current situation and the sort of financial issues that some of those men's teams are currently facing, I think there is definitely a risk that funding of the women's team may potentially suffer as a consequence of that. But I think having said this, it's not all a doom and gloom scenario for women's football, as some may sort of have written in the press, or it may be perceived that way. I think if we look back to sort of prior to COVID-19, if we look at the growth trajectory of women's football, it's been very strong sort of over the past 5 to 10 years. There's been sort of significant increases in TV audiences. If we look at the most recent World Cup in France compared to previous editions, sort of the growth has been sort of many multiples. And sort of since the World Cup as well, we've seen a lot of record-breaking attendances in club football, showing sort of that the interest in the national team is translating into interest in women's club football as well. So coming back to your point on investment, now could actually be quite a good opportunity for investors. So I think one of the questions there is, will we see investors, maybe sort of even private equity investors, getting involved at the moment? I think sort of with the expected growth trajectories of women's football, coupled with the need for many women's clubs and women's leagues, as in the need for that investment, now could be a potentially a good opportunity for partnerships between sort of women's football clubs and leagues and private equity investors, with the funding and expertise of an investor sort of resulting in a rewarding opportunity for both parties. So yeah, I think sort of that'll be an interesting one to follow and see sort of if what I think may actually sort of happen in the coming months.
Good, thank you. And also we have another question about commercial issues. Maybe you can say any ideas, Izzy. What practical commercial steps should clubs and leagues be taking to not only maintain, but ideally continue to increase their value to existing and potential brand partners? So you have any ideas? No, I also...
Yeah, I mean, there's potentially sort of a lot of things that could be done, but maybe just to name one example, I think sort of one of the things that women's football clubs or leagues can do to sort of enhance the value to their commercial partners is through fan engagement. And sort of one of the examples of this could be sort of telling stories about their players, for example. And that can be done on social media, which is sort of very low to no cost, and which the players can even do themselves. For example, sort of can the clubs sort of encourage the players to maybe document on social media sort of how they're finding the current situation, sort of what they're doing, maybe posting videos of when they go back to training, what it's like, how they're finding it. I think that insight into the players' lives can be sort of really engaging for fans, and sort of with that increased fan engagement, that can really add value to a club or a league's commercial partners.
Thank you. And also, Nan, what do you think about investment in women's football? Is a good opportunity now to invest in women's football? And what do you think the difference in the two markets, US and Japan, and also investment, if you can relate the two topics?
Sure. Well, I agree with Izzy. I do think that it's a good time to invest women's football. However, we need to probably find investors that have a longer term view, because the women's football has its very unique values that do not necessarily translate to value immediately. For example, the women players have a lot more connections and direct interactions with their fans and communities. And as mentioned earlier, with the World Cup, Asian Cup, a lot of international level tournaments, we are seeing the revenue going up. The pandemic is definitely a setback on the schedule of women's football development. So it might take a little bit for the teams themselves to be able to turn out profit. But I think if you take a long-term view, there's definitely a lot of commercial upsides in investing in women's football, especially now. You might even get a price discount depending on which country, which league you invest in. And also, I think there's some discussion about whether women's football should be sponsored by the men's teams. I think that's also a possibility. Looking at the history of NBA and ice hockey, it's actually pretty difficult for women's sports teams to survive on their own from the nascent stage. But if you look at the NBA in the early stage, the NBA franchises owned and operated the WNBA teams. But once they were able to find their investment, their independent investment, the teams became private and they're owned separately. So I think there could be a transition stage and some creative solutions to the problem as well.
Yeah. Sure, thank you. And also because you are living in the US and you know very well the market, could you give us and share your legal opinion, your perspective about the decision, the last decision of the US national women's team? What do you think about also if this decision came during the COVID-19 time? Or?
Yeah, so many of you might know that the women's national team, football team, filed a litigation case against the U.S. Soccer Federation for pay equity. So the decision by a federal district court in California actually came out in early May, on May 1st, I believe. And the case was partially thrown out at the summary judgment stage. For those of you who have some familiarity with the U.S. Civil procedure, you know that the defendants in these cases, well, pretty much always ask for a summary judgment, but it's very difficult to obtain because the bar, the standard is very high. In order to get a summary judgment, you have to show that there's no genuine dispute in material facts. And based on these facts, the party requesting the judgment is entitled to the judgment as a matter of law. So it's a very high bar to pass. But the court did find that, at least partially, the defendant, the U.S. Soccer Federation, met this requirement. The women's team, their arguments were basically based on two grounds. One was the violation of the Equal Pay Act, and the other one is the violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So on the first ground, the Equal Pay Act prohibits discrimination of employees on the basis of sex. And in a case like this, the plaintiff has the initial burden of proof to show that they are paid less for performing the same job. The women's national team argued that they received lower payment rates and bonuses than the men's national team. Just a little background here. Through the last two rounds of CBA negotiations, the women's national team was able to secure several benefit packages, including fixed pay contracts, ticket bonuses, and other things that are not included in the men's CBA. The men's game national team basically play on a pay-to-play model. So the court said that, during the period at issue, the women's national team played more games and actually earned more money per game than the men's national team. So if you take, they are obviously taking into all these fringe benefits into account. So it's a holistic consideration. And they also consider the background that the women's national team rejected the same pay-to-play model as the men during their negotiations and chose to actually forego higher bonus opportunities for other benefit packages. And just quickly, the second ground on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, this was actually partially accepted by the court. This Title VII prohibits discrimination of privileges, terms, conditions, and compensation based on sex. The court did find that in terms of playing conditions, for example, travel conditions and support and personnel services, the men are treated much better than the women. So this claim was accepted, and a trial date is set on June 16th. So we're all very eager to see whether or how the women's team will appeal this decision. They could wait until the 16th and go to the trial and then appeal all the claims together, or they could ask for the trial judge to grant them the right to appeal at an early stage without trying the last issue at the trial level.
Thank you for the clarification, because this is a very hot topic and difficult to understand. And can I export the equal pay to every country, or is something very special for the US professionalization and the US women's football, or we can ask for equal pay in every country? What do you think? In relation to this equal pay in the US, do you think that this is the same for every country, or it depends of the league, the professionalization, and the step?
Well, I think, of course, I think it's everywhere. Equal treatment is a universal human right. So depending on which country you are in, you might have different legislation that guarantee you that right, but it should be the right for everybody in every country. However, realistically speaking, it is true that in countries like England and the US, it's easier for you to fight these battles right now because you have a much better foundation, whereas in Japan and a lot of Asian countries, it's now even some of them don't even have a league yet, and some of them are very weak. Players are, like I said, allowed by their companies to play football. So I think the practical approach is obviously it has to be tailored based on where you are. But as a legal principle and ethical principle, I think there is equal pay, equal treatment for equal work everywhere.
Yeah, thank you. I asked this because sometimes we hear that it's in connection with revenues, no? That says equal pay is in connection with the competition and all the revenues about women's football, but maybe we need to think more than it's a gender equality issue, no? More global. So I think we can share this perspective with all the attendees. Thank you. Daniele, you are also working with commercial law, commercial issues in the club, in Juventus, no? So do you think that we have now the opportunity to be more creative with this crisis? It's time to create another package, a commercial package to create a different market, product? We think something different. What do you think?
Yes, so in order to develop women's football in general, this sport will need to take a leap of faith to become more independent in order to drive its own destiny. Traditionally, football is a sport constructed by men and for men. So being dissociated from men's football will generate more risk, develop financial stress in the short and the medium term by potentially not being evenly subsidized anymore by men's football, with the risk of losing visibility. However, in the long run, by taking a step away from its bigger brother, so the men's football, an autonomous women's football will be allowed to organize itself as an international structure able to take its own decision by standing on its own. In the current situation, women's football runs the risk of being seen as having a potential cannibalization of the revenue of men's competitions, taking its funds from men's budget instead of possible investment into youth sector or maybe esports, for instance. Women's football is dependent on the money from men's game as it's said, but an idea could be to enable women's football to create and control its own setting for the game and build a proprietary business model for different competition that is not based on templates applied in the men's game. From a purely sporting point of view, for me, could think of the formats of championship other than the male ones, more slender and maybe dynamic, such as play out and play off stage, increasing, encouraging competition between companies belonging to different federation or confederations. But on the commercial side, however, the need is to break away, in my opinion, from the logic of the male football market by offering to commercial categories that are not used to investing in football or that you cannot afford male football. This would allow, in the same time, companies to increase their revenues, but also some brands to join football clubs with low investments.
Thanks, Daniele. I also have a question from Tobias Schade related to Italy and the UK, so Izzy and Daniele. Why do the clubs focus so strongly on men's football? That's what we're talking a little bit, instead of giving themselves their own profile. This comparison will not be held up. What is like in Italy and the UK is women's football. They are also strongly based on men's football. You want to share an idea, and then Izzy.
Okay. Maybe for the reason that I already said. So in this moment, it's obviously that the women football in Italy, I am talking for my country, it's strictly connected by men with the men football, I think that what I already said, so the differences from or the dissociating from men and football, men and women football, is an opportunity for the next year, but not now, because now in Italy we need the increasing of professional teams, men teams in the women's football that can help us, can help the women's football system to increase the visibility, increase the professionalism, and ensure the revenues. In the second time, the second steps could be the separating of the two sector, with focus on commercial and the sport situation properly of the two category.
Thank you. Thanks. And Izzy, do you want to add something in the UK related to this question?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the football clubs focusing on men's football at the moment, so I think sort of the main reason for that being that so the men's first team is their primary source of revenue, and so given sort of the uncertain times and the financial unsustainability that we're in at the moment, there is a need to ensure that they've got those revenues and incomes coming in, to ensure that they've got sustainable cash flows, which will then sort of ensure that the clubs can continue to operate and sort of don't go bust, as we have seen sort of in the UK in the last few years for some professional football clubs. However, I think sort of looking at the more sort of medium to long term, there is an opportunity to think differently, and I think sort of in one of within that question, you know, it was saying, does women's football need to look exactly the same as men's football? And I think the answer to that is probably no. It doesn't have to look exactly the same. So I think there's probably an opportunity coming out of this to think of sort of what do we want women's football to look like, and it may not just be a complete replica of men's football. In fact, it's probably not that. So for example, could there be greater movement between national club competitions and European club competitions, and potentially even sort of global club competitions? I think sort of those sort of ideas are things that could potentially be discussed in the women's game, whereas in the men's game, which has got a lot more sort of history and tradition, those sort of ideas probably would be a non-starter.
Good. Thank you so much. And also I have maybe Izzy, you want to answer this question about the different strategies inside federations. Do you think every federation on the national level is on the same page when it comes to the development of women's soccer football? I don't think so. I don't know your opinion.
Well, I can't speak for every national federation, because I'm not on top of the over 200 or however many national federations there are globally. But yeah, I would probably agree that sort of the stance of each federation is not exactly the same. But what I can sort of give a little bit more comment on is the situation here in England, and sort of the English Football Association. Women's and girls football is definitely a priority, both in terms of increasing the participation of women's and girls football, to increasing its commercial value, increasing the professionalisation of the game, and also more widely sort of considering the number of females in within the game, so whether that be refereeing the game, coaching the game, or working as football administrators as well. So yeah, can't speak for every federation, but women's football is definitely a priority in England.
Good, thank you. Well, I think I agree with you. It's impossible to stay at the same page with more than 200 federations around the world. But for me, in my opinion, I have the important thing is to have a strategy, depending on the culture and also the country, different strategy for each national federation. Also in every region, because for example, in Spain, we have different federation inside the country. So it's different the north and the south. So maybe we can do different strategies depending the people and the clubs. And also I would like to add another idea is to have the right people working on women's football. And the right people is like the people that really believes in women's football development, and it's not only a moment or only for another economy issue or whatever. So I think the strategy and right people or professional people who knows the market or who wants to do something different, in my opinion and my experience in Spain, I think is really important. I don't know if Nan or Daniele wants to add something in this point. No, it's okay. So I have another question. Ricardo Cardoso, what is your opinion about a salary cap only for women's football in a European country? I don't know who wants to answer. Daniele, please.
Me. Yeah, so it's a problem that which we living, but maybe it's due to the fact that a lot of women football players are amateur in Europe. So the law and regulation for the amateur players in Italy provides that the limit, the salary cap for the amateur players, as I already said. For me, it's not right, but the big problem is the status, because if we change, we will change the status of the players. In Italy, we will not the problem of the salary, because the football player law for the professional is the same for all category, but the bigger problem is the status of players that provides the salary gap.
Thank you. I have another question, Adrian Stangaisu. What the panelists think about top league clubs, male football, being obliged to organize also a women's team. This is also in South America an issue. Is this good for the growth of women's football, or this is more like an unnecessary involvement in the club's internal business? So, who is the? Nan,
I'll take that one. So I think it's an interesting question, because sort of my first thought on that is it's not generally a good idea to force people to do things against their will, and they'll often sort of well, not often, but they might be sort of resentful towards it. So I think, as opposed to sort of forcing men's leagues or clubs to support a women's team, it's probably a little bit more about articulating the benefits to those clubs and leagues of having a women's team. So, for example, can they bring in a different fan base? Can they bring in different commercial partners through having a women's team? I think sort of that approach would probably be more successful than simply just forcing clubs and leagues to operate women's teams.
Good, thank you. Nan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I agree with what Izzy said. I don't think it's almost never a good idea to force somebody to do something. But if you can help them realize the value, the long-term value in women's football, more of them will probably want to do that on their own. And as I touched upon briefly earlier, it is sometimes difficult for women's sports teams to start from scratch all on their own. So if there are male teams that are willing to sponsor and operate these women's team, or at least assist with their initial establishment and growth, I think that might help develop the sport faster. Going back to my example earlier, the NBA did that, and that's why we have a pretty strong women's basketball league in America today. And the National Women's Hockey League is actually struggling now. They have a really interesting model. They don't want to follow what they did in other leagues. They don't want to be attached to the NHL. They want to have an all-female leadership team and have private ownership. But even to date, they're still struggling a lot with salaries, benefits. People, they just don't have enough money to pay the players at this early stage. So again, I think to the extent that the men's team are willing and able to sponsor and operate or help out the women's team, it's not a bad idea, but of course you have to ensure a long-term growth path to growth. Like, where do you eventually want to be? You have to have a kind of long-term plan in mind.
Thank you. I have two questions from Isol Cody. One, I think we were talking about that if for women's game is an opportunity to emerge stronger this crisis. I think we are agreed that we need to create this opportunity. It could be good, but you can ask something in connection with another question from the same person, Isol Cody. With the Olympics postponed and national competitions likely to pose huge difficulties until travel restrictions, isolation periods, and more, where do the panelists see the international game going in the future, given it's unfortunately unable to capitalize on the post-World Cup year? So I don't know if Nan or Izzy or Daniele, who is the first to talk about this travel and international problems that we have now with the COVID. Izzy?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I think that's an interesting question. I think the first thing I'd say is that professional and sort of elite level as well, clubs and leagues have already managed to capitalize on the World Cup. So I don't think it's necessarily that the engagement from the World Cup has been lost. I think we've seen that with a number of record attendances that have occurred in the 2019-20 season, which was as a result of the successful Women's World Cup. In terms of thinking about sort of the future of the international game, I actually think that sort of the postponement of the Olympics may not actually be a bad thing, because if we think of what international women's football will look like for the next 3 years, we've got the Olympics in summer 2021. Fingers crossed if everything's sorted out by then. We've then, from a European side of things, we've then got the Euros in 2022, which has been postponed from 2021 as a consequence of the men's Euros this summer being postponed to next year. And then the year after that, we'll then have the next edition of the Women's World Cup. So we've actually got, for the next 3 years, a major, well, from a European perspective, a major international competition. So I think that actually presents quite a big opportunity for engagement and growth in the women's game.
Thank you, Izzy. I think Son, as a a question, no?
Yeah,
Please.
I've got to reappear just because this is the privilege of being the organizer. Just on the, I thought some excellent one. I've been thoroughly enjoying this. So normally I'm more busy, but really great points from all the panelists. So thank you so much so far. In terms of looking at the finances of women's football in the sort of let's say more developed footballing nations, obviously a large proportion of revenues comes from broadcast receipts, particularly for the men's game, and then that gets redistributed. And in other countries with the less developed, it'll be more gate receipts through attendance. Isn't there an opportunity here to look at this women's football a bit differently? And so building on the points that everyone's made, is what sort of further incentivizations can there be that if it's a better strategy to be aligned to a men's football club because of the essentially prime audience, let's say, attention that they have, right? The place to draw that attention, draw in an existing fan base already. Isn't there an opportunity, or I guess my question is there an opportunity to look at further incentivization into women's football through a bit like when we've seen imbalances in, say, the NFL with the Rooney Rule, right? And we talked about this last week on football, and they looked and said, look, it's not being effective. We need to do more. And so if there is this imbalance, which there clearly is, in terms of how much money has been going into women's football, how much investment has been put in there, isn't there further incentivization rather than just say, oh, look, we'll leave you to it, find your own revenue? Yeah, when there's such an imbalance. I'd love to get everyone's perspective on that, as if, you know, say, for example, Juventus, right, if there was further exemptions, even more still, right, in terms of financial fair play, as an example, right? Yeah, has anyone given any thought to that? And I shall disappear now. Thank you.
Thanks. Any thoughts about some question, commentary?
It was that good a question, was it?
Nothing to add.
So did it make, sorry, did that question make sense in terms of, is there, or can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So is there further incentivization through alternative means? And we've seen already, so there's already some exemption under financial fair play. Could it go further to encourage investment, building on Nan's point about a positive obligation rather than enforcing people to do something? You say, hey, it's very attractive for you to invest beyond what is already there currently.
But Sean, very shortly, I've already said that in my last question. The problem is not for me, in my opinion, it's not the kind of solution or regulation to search to develop all the system. For me, it's a mentality that it's different between men's football and women's football now, and this is not a problem or a minus between each other, but I think that the separation of controlling or rules or government or a league between the two kinds of football, for me, could provide the benefit for all system, because the mentality is different, but not in the terms of playing, in the terms of attention from the people. I saw that with Juventus, that the people that comes to see the match on the Sunday are totally different. We are family, we are a child, we are girls. It's different way to think, to approach to the football. And for me, it's important that the brands of the best men's football clubs entry in the women's football with their capacity, with their structures, with their manager. But in the second moment, for me, in my opinion, it's a necessary an entity, a management different between the two sectors in order to grant to the women's football the right attention that it needs.
Thanks. Thank you, Danielle. I have another question about the player's career, and this is also very important because they are amateur in most of the country. So I now know as how can we support players' career and utilize their capacities when moving from amateur to professional league in the US, England, or other countries with professional women's football league? Are there any educational opportunities or other supports for female players by national football associations or leagues to build their career after their retirement as a professional athlete? Maybe Izzy can give you something about the UK, and then Nan and Danielle in here and his country, please.
So yeah, no, definitely a very sort of valid and an important question. I think sort of the viewings of here in England and the UK is that we have a professional footballers association, so the PFA, and that's an association that both sort of professional men's and women's footballers can be a part of. So that the PFA does offer a lot of career and educational support. So if footballers are looking to sort of develop themselves and establish a career post their football career, then they can sort of utilise the services of the PFA. But I think sort of that question also sort of raises the point around youth development as well, and the importance for players that are younger and are developing to ensure that they can continue their education. So I think sort of it's sort of responsibility of the clubs or the academies that they're playing for to ensure that those players are able to sort of maintain their education as well as sort of developing their football careers.
Thank you. Nan, do you want to add something maybe in Japan or also in the US?
Yeah, just quickly, I think a lot of the countries that have a strong players association would support the players through the players association. You know, they would have seminars on, financial education, second career planning, things like that. And also in the US, there's a very active private sector that are run by consulting firms and investment banks that provide a lot of these services for free to players. Of course, you have to be a little careful what service you choose and who you choose to associate with, but they do have some very good information that you can get. And in the case of Japan, for example, currently the Players Association only has male members because female football is still amateur at this point, so they don't have any female members, but they are looking to expand the membership to be able to get in there and help female members negotiate on a collective level in light of the professionalization next year. So, depending on which country you are at, the Players Association is a good place to look at, and also some private sector information might be helpful.
Thank you. And Daniele, do you have something in Italy regarding women's football? Because
very shortly, in acknowledge the reason for the amateur players or women players system or program by the federation that provides service for the end of careers. There is a program for the professional men's players, but by the Lega Serie A and the AIC, so Associazione Italiana Calciatori. For the men players, for the professional players, but for the amateur players, so also including the women football players, in my knowledge, there isn't a program.
Yeah, in Spain, I think it's something that we need to work more because we are focused on men's football, maybe.
Yeah,
but also, we think that in Spain, women's football players, most of them, because they are amateur or quasi-professional, most of them have studies or educational or also university degrees. So it's different than the career of a men football player. So maybe we need to think about different strategies related to men's football or women's football and post-career and legacy and wherever. I don't know, it's such an idea. Okay, so I would like to, because we have 15 minutes more, and I would like to throw you last questions to every panelist. I think it's really important to talk about ideas, to talk about something to the future, to women's football. We talk some ideas in this conference, but would it be good if we can propose something to professionalize more women's football, a message to the future? In my point of view, I said before, to develop a strategy, not copy and paste, so a strategy focused on each country and each culture and each people and each competition. That is something more difficult. You need to work on that, but I think a strategy from my point of view is really, really important to develop the women's game and football, and also the people who believe in it, no? That I said before. So what do you think? What is your message to the future and your ideas? Daniele, please. First.
Yes. So I already said my point of view, my opinion. So for the same reason that I better explained before, I would like to offer a big provocation to all federation, to all women's club that join in this year the playing football. Totally separate the women's game from the men's game and create in the next, I don't know, 5 years, a separate entity that controls the rules and law of women's football with the diversification of panel and expert of the women's sector and at all levels, so commercial, sport, legal, and financial, I don't know. An independent framework could help facilitate and assure that the specificities of women football are being taken into consideration in the decision making for the professionalization of the women's game.
Good, thank you. Izzy, please.
So I think we've already sort of mentioned a number of ideas, sort of including sort of potential investors coming on board, and also trying to think differently about the women's game and not make it the same as the men's game. But I guess sort of the additional point that I'd like to raise here is around rivalries, and the reason being is that many of the greatest and most commercially valuable stories in sport are built upon rivalries. So, for example, Real Madrid versus Barcelona, or sort of outside of football, thinking of potentially sort of the America versus Europe competition in golf, so the Ryder Cup. Those are two great rivalries that attract a lot of fan interest and therefore commercial interest as well. And so bringing that back to women's football, it's kind of no surprise that the record attendances in England that we saw this season came from two big rivalries. So that being Manchester City versus Manchester United, and then also the first ever women's North London derby in the top tier of English football, Tottenham versus Arsenal. So I think the idea for women's football is to be able to promote, if they can promote those rivalries and or create new rivalries that will be talked about for years to come, is a potentially lucrative opportunity for women's football.
Many thanks. So Nan, please, your turn.
Okay. Yeah. So first of all, the point that Izzy made was very interesting. I'm still digesting it. It's quite an interesting point. But what I was thinking is that I think it's important for women's football to try to win in the court of public opinion as well as the court of law. We should appeal to the public with unique social values, like we discussed earlier. The women's football is not plagued with some of the problems that are currently plaguing men's football, such as racism, hooliganism. Women's football is much more approachable than the men's game. The players often mingle more and have a lot more direct relationships with their fans and community. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to capitalize on that. And if we can hold on to these values and try, to become the social champions for women's rights and equality issues, I think that's a great way for us to get a lot of support and fan engagement from the society as a whole. And also international competitions are very important in women's game. Those are the opportunities where you can, raise your profile, stay relevant and visible to the society and fans. So we need better organized and better advertised international tournaments.
Thank you, Nan.
So I'm going to come in just to ask Reyes her view on that, because no one's going to ask us. So I'll ask you, what's your view?
Well, as I said before, I think we need the strategy, and also something that Nan was talking before. And I think to develop women's football is also a matter of gender equalities. I think we need to try to create opportunities, and then every way could be good, but we need first to create the same opportunities for every girl. So this is a matter of gender equality. And I think if we work on gender equality in football, that is my also commitment. You can change also the world, because football has power to change everything, So that's my view.
I think you've all raised some really interesting points. I've just been sitting here reflecting quite heavily on your comments, and I think in the broader footballing landscape, given that the financial turmoil that it's going to be in, and given that men's football in particular has been upheld artificially for a very long period of time, either through government bailouts, through investors chucking in loads of money, it's been, there's a general sentiment from all the panels that we've had is that the governance of many football clubs hasn't necessarily been that great, particularly outside the big ones. You wonder how you can compete so I look at it from a business owner's perspective. If I'm starting out into a sector and I'm competing in a market where everyone's been artificially upheld, if I'm not able to get that same type of capital, how can I possibly compete? I think it's made me think quite long and hard about how do you create that, as you were saying, Reyes, about that equality. We've got a question that I'll bring in. So there was Divya Patak. I think Izzy addressed your point in terms of, which I think is that would have been a good, if I was quicker on the mark, and maybe I can quickly do a poll. Should women's football have its own regulatory regime or not? I'll see if I can do that. Whilst I'll disappear in the background. Daniele, Chimaka Agunu has asked for if you could just articulate what you think the upside is from having a different approach to women's football as opposed to men's football. I think I kind of understood what you're saying, but I think you were saying there's a different type of approach in terms of I think you were talking about, if I'm right in inferring what you were saying, that you were saying that there's a different type of audience that's currently going, different type of league structure, etc., and therefore there's a different approach. But maybe you want to expand on what you see as the upside of having a completely separate approach to the women's team. And I'll go back and do a poll in the interim period before we close off, just to see what people think.
Well, I appreciate the question, but my its provocation is in the for the system maybe I already said in this session that I feel that the approach of the big football clubs on the men's side, so the biggest club in Europe in this year, it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary in the women's sector to permit to all the people that generally see the football match in the men's sector to approach also the women's sector. So in this year, it's necessary to have both the system that speak each other. But in the futures, for the different old systems or mentality or support or kinds of supporters, for me, this is the future. The future is the separate the two systems, the two management, in order to guarantee to the women football its specialties. It's
so to exploit the opportunity that's there.
Yes.
Yeah, rather than diluting. I think it's really interesting. They really come to the end of all of this. I would say that, say for example, the Premier League acquires the Women's Football Super League. What happens if it's a competing product? What takes priority in that? You know, it's really interesting to say, if you're trying to air the games at the same time, if they run parallel, is there a conflict there? You know, if they both scale, if it scales. So I'm going to launch this poll, and I should have allowed the panelists. Sorry, I didn't allow you to do that. I can't stop it now. Maybe you can just tell us what you think. So the poll is: do you think women's football should have its own governing body separate from the men's football? And apologies for the grammatical errors. I'm severely dyslexic, as it happens, but normally my colleagues bail me out and prove everything that I do. So let's let that run for a minute. Whilst we're doing that, we can close off on that. I just wanted to thank you all very much for those insights. I said you've given me certainly a lot to think about in this regards, both from the regulatory perspective, the commercial structures, issues around employment status, player associations, career development. There's been a lot that's been covered in this, expertly chaired, I might add, from Reyes. So thank you very much for your contributions and structuring that so nicely. So here we go. As if it was to help, and why I knew I should have put a third option in, end poll, and also show share the results. So we only got 40 respondents, just under 40 responses, but 50-50. It'd be good to know if we could have the gender demographic as well, to see if it was a male-female split. That was not helpful. Thanks everyone for contributing to that, but I think it shows you certainly that there's the complexity of this, navigating it. As I said to all of the panelists and speakers and moderators, I'll say it again, thank you all sincerely. You know, you're all very busy people. You're all giving up your time freely. Like I said, we don't pay any of the speakers, not because we're cheapskates, but just in terms of our model of being independent. That's how we have to do things this way. Nor do we allow people to pay to speak. Everyone has given up their time sincerely and genuinely to just share knowledge, particularly on this important issue. So thank you very much sincerely for everyone. They do a lot of, what we don't see is they do a lot of prep in advance of this, with pre-calls, with emails going back and forth. And I said, they're all independently very busy. Thank you all to your contribution. It's awesome that we have so many people from around the world tuning in, asking questions. On the point that Reyes asked, like, let's try and implement some of the things. We'll do a summary of this after the event, and we'll publish this on YouTube as well. If you're doing really cool stuff, you need support, please reach out to all these wonderful speakers and reach out to other people as well. I'm sure they'll be happy to contribute and help, as we would as well. So thank you all very much. Thank you. I'll give you a virtual round of applause or a Zoom round of applause. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you too.
Have a lovely rest of your day and evening and man morning in the US.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Daniele.